You know, gay, when you're a Japanese guy pretending to be an Italian American in a show about Italian Americans for a mostly Japanese audience, you're only really good at one of two things: making a lasagna and killing people. And I ain't in the business of making lasagnas, if you're picking up what I'm putting down.
Check this out. Take a look at that, huh? Right? Can't really see it. I just bought this recently. How freaking cool is that? You can't see it, but I'm gonna put it up on the wall over there, and you might see it occasionally replace the Star Wars poster every now and then. I'll swap them out every now and then, just to keep things more interesting. I've also finally got myself a Diet Coke. It's been so long. Oh, that sounds beautiful. So, recently I watched the anime 91 Days, which is a revenge story all about Avilio Bruno. In the first episode, we see him as a child when he was known as Angelo, when he witnesses his entire family get murdered by the Veneta Mafia family. 7 years later, he receives a mysterious letter in the mail from a man claiming to be the friend of his father that contains a list of all the men responsible, and so he goes back to his hometown of Lawless, Illinois to take his revenge. The very opening scene of this episode showcases perfectly how twisted and dark this show can get. Forcing a child to watch his family be murdered in front of him and then having to run away from them, it perfectly sets the tone for the entire show. Speaking of which, this show is absolutely full of really intense and brutal deaths, similar to the one in the first season. For example, there's one scene that's very reminiscent of Batman 1985. Is it 85? I think it's 85. 89. Okay, I was way off. Anyway, there's a scene in this show very reminiscent of Batman 1989, where a new head of one of the mafia families tricks all of the executives into eating the corpse of their former Don. One of the first things to stand out to me in this show is the setting of 1930s American Italian mafia. It's just such a cool place to tell any story. I mean, the mob genre is one of my absolute favorite genres, but this specific setting is really great because of how much attention to detail went into every aspect of it. All of the buildings, the cars, the clothes, even the way that the characters talk, so incredibly on point to that time period. It feels almost like it's straight out of a history book, especially in the dub. And I know anime dubs have a really huge negative connotation to them, but this one is really, really impressive because they put in the extra detail and the extra steps of having these actors put on a proper Italian-American accent reminiscent of that time period and of the people that we're dealing with. In fact, I was actually talking to my brother about this before I checked out the dub, that if the dub did not have those accents, then it would not be good at all. It would not be valid.
Let's have it. If I just gave you the recipe, you wouldn't need me. Stop! Say, why don't you take these off, huh? Come on, let's have a little drink. We're partners. This calls for a toast. I told you to stop! You're jumping at shadows, pal.
It can get really boring and really monotonous to see just the same environments and the same places in all of these anime, especially because this story could so easily be told with the Yakuza in Tokyo or Kanto, and it was really nice that they put in that extra step of having a new time period and a new country. It really did make everything so much cooler. Avilio Bruno is a tragic character who completely loses his mind and his humanity in pursuit of his revenge, later becoming, as he describes himself, an empty shell without purpose or ambition. He even goes so far as to almost kill an innocent man's wife and children for his vengeance, and by the end of the show he not only accepts death but actually welcomes it. There aren't really any good guys in this show, or at least there's no clear moral lines drawn. It's more so a character study in the same way as Joker or Death Note, where you don't really root for any of the characters specifically, but you care about them enough that you're intrigued by their story and you're interested to see how they become who they become and what is happening to them. them. It also does a really good job of making you care about Avilio and Corteo, primarily through their situation and past. As well, Avilio's plans and how he executes them, as well as the things that he's willing to do, are really compelling and interesting in a similar way to Light Yagami. This show does not hold back at all in showing the very twisted and dark nature of the Mafia and of certain aspects of life. For example, the opening scene, but also when Avilio starts killing people. The first person he kills is a man named Valo Clemente, who is one of the people responsible for his parents' murder. The entire scene is so cinematically perfect. It starts off with Vano marching a man to his death while simultaneously praying to God for forgiveness, which one of the things that this show does very well is hammering in how ironic it is that most of the Mafia people, especially in the 1930s, were so incredibly religious. Like, this man is praying for forgiveness from God while simultaneously marching a man to where he will be murdering him. And after Vano kills the man whilst he was begging for his life, Avilio then cold-heartedly tells Vano the truth and shoots him immediately, without showing any sort of pity, remorse, or even humanity while doing it. All of that grandness and dark twistedness of this show is really pushed to the maximum during the climactic battle between the Veneti family and the Galicius family. This battle completely destroys both the island and the playhouse, which are cemented as staples of this show from the very first episode. The entire thing is incredibly intense and dark, just like the show, and some of the things that you see and some of the things that happen during it are genuinely heartbreaking to watch. That said, the actual ending of this show feels a little bit lackluster. Like, after all of this time building up Avilio's revenge, it feels a little bit disappointing what ends up actually happening. Especially when you look at the poster of the show, which clearly is suggesting that there's going to be some kind of epic fight between the two in the middle of this grand church. In reality, they just kind of go for a drive and one of them ends up shooting the other. That said, it is a very emotional moment for both Avilio and Nero, who have a very clear bond built up throughout the show. Especially because the whole thing is clearly meant to be very reminiscent of their drive through the country from the very beginning, showing both how they've changed, how their dynamic has changed, and how everything around them has changed. And I especially love seeing when the surviving one is driving off and he seems almost reminiscent and a little bit regretful of what he's actually done. Speaking of their drive through the country from the beginning of the show, that whole sequence, as well as most of the show, has a really healthy balance of very realistic humor. It helps strengthen their bond as characters, and it doesn't feel tacky or like it's added in solely for comedic effect. It does help to build their friendships, as well as give a very, very needed break from the real intensity and terribleness of a lot of the show, like I've talked about. Now, I absolutely love both the opening and closing themes of this show. The opening is so intense and grand, just like the show. It really gets you hyped up for what you're about to see, and all of the visuals accompanying it just amplify that so much. The closing, on the other hand, is so calm and simple that it feels almost ironic and in contrast of the show, sort of a way to decompress and calm down while you think about everything that just happened. Now, this show certainly is not perfect, and one of my biggest complaints about it is how unnecessarily complicated and convoluted the plot gets, especially near the end. Especially when they bring in this character who's supposed to be this massive police force against the Mafia. He's supposed to be this big deal who's super strong against them, but then he just quits within the first episode. Now, the reason he quits is that the Mafia tried to kill his family, and though they failed, and that decision does say a lot about Avilio's character, the fact that he just leaves after being hyped up as this big important thing really feels like a massive cop-out and a complete waste of time. I think it would have been a lot better if they tried to keep the actual story of the conflicts between the Mafia families a little bit simpler, so that we could focus a lot more on Avilio, his character, and his revenge. Especially in such a short series where you don't really have the time to flesh out these conflicts as much. As well, the animation does seem to get a bit lazy near the end. Like, there are so many shots that are just a still image of an environment while characters are talking, and sometimes the animation just stops mid-conversation and it's like my screen had actually frozen. And I know this is more of a nitpick, but it's really irritating to me that while the episodes are all labeled as a day, they only go up to 12. So The show is called 91 Days, but there are only 12 days, and the story does take place over the course of about 3 months, so that's around 91 days, but I think that the episodes are just labeled weirdly. Now this show definitely does have a lot of value through its themes, and I think they're themes that a lot of people can learn from. Firstly, it's obviously a story about revenge and how it can destroy you and destroy your humanity and really cause nothing more than pain for everybody around you, leaving you, as Avilio described himself, an empty shell. Almost like the pleasure you get from vengeance is only temporary and it only lasts for a very short amount of time before you realize how empty and unhappy you really are. But it also plays around with themes of loyalty and family, which are really important to me and things that I think this show talks about and introduces in a lot more subtle ways than The Vengeance, but is nonetheless very important and very interesting. Overall, I really liked this show. It's certainly not great. The ending is a bit anticlimactic, but I also think that it has some really interesting characters and really interesting themes, as well as being able to handle lots of intense scenes and intense action really, really well. So if you want to see great anime along the lines of Death Note and Akira, this is not the show for you. But if you really love the mob genre and you want to see a short revenge story, this is definitely a show worth checking out. According to YouTube statistics, only a very small portion of the people who are watching this here video I actually subscribe to the channel. So, you better hit that subscribe button or I'll beat you into a spaghetti bolognese. You'll be sleeping with the fishes if you're picking up what I'm putting down. I'm gonna kill you.